Welcome in, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me today. In this episode, I'd like to discuss a theory, philosophy, way of being that's really close to my heart, which I call or is related to making our life our meditation cave. And, this is something I've explored in lots of different ways in my Dharma practice and in my life as a meditator. And I'm guessing for those of you out there who already have a meditation practice, this is something you've explored. And so here I'd like to share some ideas about my experience of relating to life as a meditation cave, and also some of my experience of, actual meditation caves and time in retreat, and how that might apply to our discussion and exploration of this. And so before we jump into the topic today, if you're a regular watcher of my YouTube channel, please subscribe if you haven't already. And if you're listening on Spotify and iTunes, feel free to check out scotttusa.com, where I have more episodes on there, as well as blogs and all kinds of content you can check out. So without any further ado, let's talk about life as the meditation cave. So for some of you out there, this might be kind of an obvious one. For me, I'm maybe dense or, stubborn. And so I've had to explore this in lots of different ways. So I'd love to share a little bit of my background working with, both life metaphorically as a meditation cave, but actually the literal meditation cave. So when I first encountered Buddhism in my early 20s, I encountered a form of it, and what attracted me to it was this idea of the yogi or yogini on the mountain. The idea of the recluse who's, gone away from the world and who goes into, a literal meditation cave and or some kind of meditation hut or cabin, and sits with their mind and sits with their practice. And at the time, I think I really had no clue of what that actually meant. It was a fantasy. It was some idea of, books I had read on yogis. I think the first book I read on yogis was Autobiography of a Yogi from Yogananda. This kind of sparked my interest in Eastern spiritual traditions. And then from there, I found the Zen tradition of Buddhism, and eventually landed in Tibetan Buddhism, where we have, in the Tibetan Buddhist traditions or lineages, lots of stories of yogis and yoginis who are, either monks or nuns, or these kind of mountain yogis and yoginis who go off from the village and practice in the mountains. And specifically, one I'm thinking of, which is not just inspiring to me, but inspiring to most Tibetan Buddhist practitioners, is Milarepa. And so some of you might know of him, some of you might not. If you don't know of him, I recommend going and checking out the biography of Milarepa. There's a few translations of it these days. And Milarepa, why he inspired so many is because he went from not only just an average human life, but a human life filled with a certain amount of adversity and how you'd say like crime, if we're to put it literally. I mean, he killed people when he was younger out of jealousy, out of revenge, and immediately after he did that, he had intense guilt and regret. And from there, because he lived in Tibet, in Tibetan culture, he could seek out the Dharma. It was part of the culture. And he, went to that as a means to work with his guilt and regret. And after meeting several teachers, he met his main root teacher named Marpa, or the Lotsawa Marpa, because he was a translator who was going between India and Tibet at the time. And also had studied with really, really profound lineage masters like Naropa, etc., in India, and had brought back not only the lineage of scripture and text, but also the lineage of experiential teachings and practice. And so, Marpa was a major lineage figure at the time, though, a householder, a family man at the same time, not a monastic. Anyways, Milarepa eventually found him, and you can read in the biography what happened. He went through these trials with his teacher as well as in his practice, and eventually became a mountain-dwelling yogi who conquered space and time and suffering, and became awakened in one lifetime. So Milarepa is this kind of Buddhist rags to riches story in the true sense of the meaning, the full richness of enlightenment, where he went from rags and creating a lot of harm to actually attaining awakening in one life. And Milarepa primarily did that through solitary retreat, through going into retreat in remote mountains and really dealing with a lot of physical hardship in order to proceed in his practice, in order to progress. There's also many stories in Tibetan Buddhism of all kinds of practitioners, to practitioners in the monasteries also attaining high realization and awakening as a monk or nun within the community. There's also stories of householder practitioners, practitioners of all walks of life, of all ages, attaining awakening, basically shifting their mind, transforming their mind enough through meditation to transcend suffering and to be able to benefit others in a capacity that most of us, can't, if I'm to put it frankly. So anyways, what's in common with all of these practitioners, from Milarepa to other kinds of practitioners, monastic practitioners, non-monastic householder practitioners, or different kinds of yoginis and yogis, they all worked really hard. They all worked really hard at the practice of working with the mind, working with thoughts, working with emotions, working with how clinging arises within the mind, working with duality and how that binds us to samsara, or the circle of suffering. And so really that's what we can find in common, but they did it in many different ways. And the other day I was reflecting on, our modern predicament as practitioners who are, seriously wanting to progress in our practice within this body, within this life. And we're often in this predicament where we might fantasize about the way other practitioners have done it, but it might not be available to us or accessible because maybe we have a family, or we don't have the means to do that, or just for where we're at right now, it's a little too daunting to look at, giving away all our things and going to live on a mountain, or even taking a step to become a monastic and live in a monastery. And so I did this. so to a certain extent, although I'm a pretty, let's just put it, I'm not a very disciplined practitioner. But I tried my best, and I really wanted to pursue the fantasy, because like I said, in my early 20s, initially, this appealed to me, this sense of I wanted to be like Milarepa. I wanted to be like the yogis I read about in Autobiography of a Yogi. I wanted to become like my teachers. Some of my teachers have done a lot of retreat and a lot of personal practice. And yet, the more and more I studied the Dharma, I also saw the essence of the Dharma as something we need to realize in the mind. Our physical body affects the mind, and how we use the physical body and our time and energy affects that. But the core practice is how we work with the mind. But knowing that, how we use our physical body, how we use our speech, how we set up our life does affect the practice. Because when it really comes down to it, no matter if we're a monastic, a yogi, or a householder, we all need to practice. There's no doubt about that. We all need to study the Dharma. We all need to reflect on it, and we need to deepen that. And for those of you who kind of aren't that far down the rabbit hole of the Buddhist path yet, you're just kind of meditating on mindfulness meditation or something else, even then it applies, because we're there for a reason. We're there, to deepen that. We want to use meditation to benefit our life, and it takes effort. It takes time. It takes practice. And this is the one thing a lot of us don't have in the modern world, because we fill our time with lots of other things. So this is one challenge I want to address. But anyways, back to my story real briefly, just to share it with you. So around the age of 20, I wanted to become a monk, and I had talked to my teacher, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, about it, and he advised, yeah, you can do it, but, there were some obstacles that he saw, mainly, because I was in college at the time, in music school, and so, I was graduating, and he saw some obstacles coming up, which, by the way, they did come up around those times, which is, I wanted to tour with the band, and I wanted to date and have partners and all that. I mean, I was 23, right, So I decided to wait when I was 2021 when I first talked to him, and I decided, okay, maybe this is something I'll do later in life. And after that, I did tour. I'm a drummer, so I toured with some bands, and I got really interested in recording engineering, and I explored that. And so I eventually ended up working for a recording studio in San Francisco. I moved from Boston to San Francisco and just pursued that. I worked some part-time jobs while I was building up my work, and eventually was able to transition full-time into being a recording engineer, producer, and mixer of people's records. And it was great. I really enjoyed it. Creative, fun, and I would, do some retreats when I could. My teachers would come to town in the Bay Area, and I'd go take teachings with them. I had my daily practice. But I was also, pursuing a 20-something life in San Francisco at the time. And so, there were a lot of distractions. There were a lot of things kind of taking me away from my practice. I think at the time I felt this duality, like my practice was there and I felt this need to deepen it. And as a Buddhist practitioner, I also felt this need, like there's this potential of mind. There's this potential that I read about, that I studied, that I saw in my teachers and some Sangha members that I wanted to grow. And then there's this division where there's this other part of me that just wants to have fun, enjoy life, etc. And, this takes time, because that sense of enjoying life, eventually we have to ask the question, what is really enjoyment? What is truly enjoyment? Is, just spending our time in pursuits that are pleasurable? Is that truly, is that something that's going to bring lasting joy? That's really the question. So we explore that in the Dharma. We explore that primarily in the renunciation mind teachings, but nonetheless, I think for all of us in the modern world, when we're not going to ideals, but going to practicality, again, this theme of the meditation cave being here and now in every moment, we need to look at our pleasure. We need to look at our pain. We need to see, well, how do we work with that? Is chasing temporary pleasure going to bring me lasting joy or not? So we do need to question that eventually. Otherwise, things don't change. We just kind of stay stuck in our habit patterns, and our practice doesn't necessarily progress in the way we want it to. So anyways, a little sidebar, but back to the story. So I did this throughout my 20s, and then around age 27, I did about a 3-week retreat with a teacher of mine on the East Coast, and something just transformed in that retreat. It was a very powerful purification retreat, a very powerful retreat in general. And by the end, I was pretty sure, the life I was leading was not going to lead me to what I wanted in relation to my Dharma practice, in relation to growing it. I felt some shame, I think, even at the time. And so I proceeded to seriously seek out becoming a monk, like I wanted to do when I was 20. And so I asked my main teacher, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, again, and this time it was like, it was more than a yes. It was like a hell yes with robes, meaning handed me robes. And he said, and then we made a plan. Okay, go do it this time of year, either with this teacher or if you can with the Dalai Lama. And so a year later, I was able to, close up all of my my business things, and I went to India and became a monk with the Dalai Lama, a novice monk, what we call a Getsul in Tibetan. And this requires a whole nother video, but there's a lot to say about that. There's a lot of things I would share to those of you aspiring to be a monastic as mistakes I made that I would recommend to avoid if you want to stay a monastic. But anyways, I was also just following the advice of my teacher who recommended to go to retreat. So most people, when you become a monk in the Buddhist tradition, most people, you do that to enter a monastery. You don't just become a monk and then go off back to your house. You leave your home and you enter the community. You enter the Sangha of ordained practitioners. That's mostly how it works in Asian Buddhist traditions, which I think is a good idea. So it wasn't completely off the rails because I was following my teacher's advice, but nonetheless, I also wanted, he happened to give advice that I liked, which is, I wanted to go into a retreat. I wanted to sit in a cabin in the woods alone and dig into my mind, to work with the Dharma, to apply it to practice. And so that's what I did. And, I was so excited. He hooked me up with a retreat place in California, just very kind, and a place where there was a caretaker because there was other people in retreat. So all we had to do was meditate. We had to have some sponsors to support our practice, and then the caretaker every 2 weeks would get groceries, and that's all we needed to do. It was very simple. But coming from a new monk, only a monk for about 3 months, and coming from a very active householder or lay life, it was like, I can't describe it. I was so excited. I was like, I had a lot of fantasies around it that and I was going to make quick progress in my practice and all of that. And I just remember after the first week, just like hitting a wall and hitting that wall hard in the recognition that, like, yep, my mind came with me. I changed my clothes. I changed my attitude. We changed a lot of things when we take monastic vows in the Buddhist traditions. Changed my hair, shaved my head, and I changed my my intentions more or less. And then also going into retreat, so kind of like two big things at the same time, because not all monastics go into retreat. A lot go into, like I said, a monastery or a study program. Anyways, so yeah, I hit that wall, and I continued to hit that wall for 3 years, and this was over the course of probably like, I would do like 3 to 4 month retreats, like 2 of those per year, maybe 3 sometimes. So, like half of the year, a little more than half of the year in retreat. And then I would come out to take teachings. And this was per the advice of Lama Zopa at the time, who unfortunately has since passed away. But that was his advice. You don't have to be super strict. You don't have to be like rigid about it. Go take teachings. You're still learning. So go out and take teachings and then come back to retreat. And so I did that. And in those retreat periods, it was really hard because I was alone, and I had this ideal that I should be very austere and in silence all the time. And yet around me in the retreat community, there was monks with a lot of knowledge and experience who had been in retreat for some of them 3, 6, 8 years. And, I wanted to meet with them. So some of the retreats, I made it a little more loose where I would keep my sessions, but once a week I'd have tea with one of the monks or a meal, and we would chat if they weren't in retreat. And then some retreats I was really strict, and I didn't see or talk with anyone. And they were really hard. They were very isolating. There was elements of my psychology that wasn't ready for that. And yet they were very fruitful. I was able to work with the Dharma and connect with it in ways that I'd never had up until that point. And so it was kind of this, this imperfection that ended up being such a useful part of that experience of being able to go into retreat. And then, I left that retreat center after 3 years and moved into my other main teacher, Sonri Rinpoche's retreat center, and was a monk for another 7 years. But during that time, I ended up traveling more and teaching more around the country, and so around the United States. And so I would try to do at least 4 months of retreat a year, if not more, and then the rest I would be traveling, taking teachings or teaching myself. And then things became a little less focused than when I was in the solitary forest environment, but nonetheless still very supportive. And actually in that way, there was this element of integration of practice. I actually am a big fan of, if we're going to go into solitary formal retreat, try shorter periods and then integrate them. So you go in for, let's say, a month or so, and then if you have time, a weekend's fine too, though, and a week is fine, right? But if you have more time, going for a month or so, then come back into your life and check your practice, see how it goes with your relationships, with family, with work, see how you can integrate things. So I like that way of doing it for modern practitioners. But anyways, it's not the intention of this video, but it's coming up. So I had that experience. And then in 2017, I decided to return my monastic vows and move to New York City and continue my teaching work while just being an everyday practitioner. And I knew at that point there was such precious advice I received from other monastic friends, because I felt a lot of pain around returning my monastic vows. It wasn't like a woohoo moment, let's party. It was quite sad. I knew there was a large part of me that wanted to continue it. And then there was a part of me that knew there was other things I needed to explore, and I couldn't do it anymore. And I, just basic human stuff. I also wanted a partner, things like that. And so, anyways, some advice I got from friends at the time. One of them told me, you wear your robes around your heart now. It's very beautiful. Kind of similar to this idea of our life is the meditation cave. He said, wear your robes around your heart. Basically, it was advice he received from his teacher when he had disrobed or returned his monastic vows. And then another monk let me know, just to rejoice in all the effort I made, and don't feel bad. Like, just continue on with practice. And it was his advice that was really core. He was actually the monk I returned my vows to, because we have different, there's different formalities we do in the monastic Buddhist traditions. And, it's a little more respectful to return them to another monastic, or it just has to be another person who can hear you. But basically, we return them respectfully, and they have to accept. And anyways, after he accepted, he shared that advice with me, just keep going. You did a lot of work in your practice, just keep going. And it just gave me this fortitude that, okay, now my life is the cave. And also, maybe later in life, the cave can also be the cave too. So that's kind of the essence of what I want to really share in this video. Sorry if it's too much about my story, but for me, it's the context for what I'm sharing with you. Where life as the cave is what a lot of us have to do. And the cave here, the metaphorical cave, is that place where we're working with our mind, where we're working with the Dharma. We're trying to deepen it. We're trying to grow our heart of bodhicitta, our heart of compassion, loving kindness. We're trying to connect with Buddhist non-duality and really cut through clinging, trying to cut through our suffering, trying to understand what binds us to pain and how to remove that. And from a Buddhist perspective, that bondage is something that happens in the mind. It doesn't happen from the outside in. It happens from the inside out. And so once that recognition happens, we can recognize that the Dharma is dependent upon the mind, and practicing with the mind. And of course, understanding the path of Dharma and applying it to practice. I mean, we need, often if we want to go deep, we do need to understand what we're doing and study to a certain extent. Then we need to put it into practice. And what does that? The mind. Working with our thoughts, working with our emotions, working with this fundamental confusion of how we reify ourselves in the world around us, how we, take for granted that maybe what's appearing to our mind is not exactly how reality is. And so once we start to question that, the whole thing opens. And once we start to cultivate awareness and an ability to be present with mind, then we work with it, right? And we work with it and we fall. And maybe I work with it. I'll say I work with it and I fall down. I get up, I work with it, I fall down again. I get up and I keep going. And that's the point. What else are we going to do at a certain point? We grow a kind of passion for this, a recognition that there's it's the best kind of meaning we can bring to our lives in the world around us, because as we're really cultivating that compassionate wisdom, that becomes the compassionate wisdom we can extend to others, into helping them with their own suffering, their own pain, and their own confusion to a certain degree. So in this way, I find it really helpful to think of my life and whatever's in front of me as the meditation cave, in the sense that my mind and body go wherever my legs go. And wherever my legs go, I need to be conscious. I need to be mindful. I need to be aware of how I'm working with my conduct, working with my thoughts, how I'm relating to my sense of self in any given moment. And of course, in the Dharma, we have so many practices to work with. For any of you who are interested in traditional Buddhism, there's so much. For those of you who are already practicing it, you know what I'm talking about. And so whatever practice we're working with, that's what we work with in the moment. But the basic thing is to be present with mind. The basic thing is to not allow our mind to fool us. to allow our mind to spin stories and projections that take us into our afflictive emotions, that take us into anger, further clinging attachment, and misperception, right? So that's mainly what we're remedying here through awareness and mindfulness. When we become exhausted with trying to create a state in meditation, this is the maturity that develops, where we recognize a state is just another form of pleasure. However still we can get in meditation, however blissful we can feel, that ends the moment we get up and start walking around. The moment we start getting up and walking around, our thoughts come back in. Our sense of self, reforms itself. And guess what? Our afflictive emotions and habit patterns are right there as well. So we need to affect those, right? And so again, I'm not going into like a lot of detail here on how to do that. In some of my other videos, I talk about it, but also if you have anything you want to ask me, feel free to reach out on my website. I'm happy to make some content on it. But, we're so lucky these days. We have so much content on the internet, so much content in books and different kinds of media to learn. But on top of that, we need teachers. That's important too. So, if you're really serious about this, seek out a teacher or many teachers. But anyways, the core recognition is most of you who are listening to this are householder practitioners. You have a job, maybe you have a family, you're out in the world. And so we really need to take this seriously, that we need to take advantage of every moment to practice the Dharma, whether we're laying down, whether we're standing up, whether we're walking, whether we're with others, whether we're alone, whether we're working, whether we're at ease. And of course, for many of us, this requires a formal meditation practice, because it's within that formal meditation practice, let's say in the morning, that we cultivate awareness, that we cultivate bodhicitta, that we cultivate boundless compassion, that we cultivate a mind that's a little more clear and awake, that then gets applied throughout the day. So, if we have nothing to apply throughout the day, we have no meditation cave, right? So this is just something to think about. We need some kind of formal thing we're building. And this is where I would say the actual meditation cave is really useful, going on retreat when we can. Maybe for some of us in the householder life, working hard to save money, live simply, and then retire early so we can do more retreat later in life. Or integrating it throughout our life, having a means of livelihood where we can take some time away to go on week-long retreats or longer, right? And anyways, we're all just trying our best. And that's what I'm saying here. We need to persevere in the right way. In a way, having aspirations and then maybe fantasies that inform those aspirations is really important, and I want to say that if we always have a fantasy that, practice will happen later, or we need these certain things for practice to happen, or we actually need a meditation cave or meditation cabin to really progress, I don't know how healthy that is. But if those fantasies lead to aspiring to deepen our connection to the Dharma and the mind, then that's positive, because the aspiration is all we have a lot of the time. The aspiration to deepen our practice, the aspiration to wake up from our pain and confusion, and the aspiration to help others through waking up. This is really important, but we have to weed this out from fantasies, because sometimes fantasies, they don't let us deal with the mind here and now. They leave us kind of wanting and lusting after something in the future. Now, I'm just telling you this because I did that, and like I said, I was able to somewhat make that happen. But even then, it was really challenging, right? And it wasn't perfect. I made a lot of errors, a lot of mistakes. But of course, could I say my practice would be where it is? Whatever that means. It's not really anything to brag about. But whatever little practice I have, would it be possible without having done retreat, like formal retreat and meditation place? Probably not. So I'm really thankful for that. But my point is, it didn't look how I thought it would look. Everywhere we go, whether it's in a solitary retreat or cave or just with our family, everywhere we go, we bring our mind with us. So the main thing is to cultivate the tools to work with the mind. And, depending on our proclivities, those don't have to be complex. It really depends on the person. But if they're simple, we need to apply them. And often simplicity is the most challenging. So for me personally, I've really benefited from kind of going into the Dharma a little more extensively, at least for me. But that's just in relation to me. But it's helped because then when I'm working in more simple ways with the Dharma, there's context. I don't know. There's kind of like, it's relatable. It's not so abstract. And, I know why I'm putting it into practice. Sometimes I don't, well, actually all the time, I don't know the outcome of that, but we don't need to. The point is to engage the process. The point is to get it going and putting it into practice in a way that we can relate to it. And that builds on itself. I guess that's really what I'm trying to say. That builds on itself over time. And we grow a practice. So I think that's about it. The main point is, whether we are a full-time practitioner, whether we're a full-time mom, whether we're monk, nun, I don't know, CEO, we all have to find our way to penetrate the essence of the Dharma and to uncover our awakened nature. This is our puzzle to figure out. And as many of you know, I'm a fan of, traditional Dharma paths because they have lots of years of research and development. Just because something's old doesn't mean it's, how do you say it? Wrong or misguided or not modern, or how do you say out of date. No, we update it through our life. We apply it to life, and the mind is the mind. I really believe that. No matter what day and age it is, no matter what culture, no matter how we identify ourselves, our mind is the mind, fundamentally. We may go through different issues and we may have different relationships to mind, but the fundamental nature of mind is the same. So the Dharma essentially applies to that. So for me, it applies to everyone, wherever we're at. Now we just need to find that way to bridge it into our life. That's not easy, right? That's the puzzle I was referring to. That's the puzzle we all need to work out. So that's about it. Thanks so much for sticking with me to the end. If you did, feel free to reach out, really, if this resonated with you. And if it didn't, feel free to reach out too. Let me know why, or offer some other ideas of what you think. And as always, I'm here. I'm happy to support you in your practice. You can always contact me via my website, scotttusa.com. And I think that's about it. So thanks so much. I really appreciate you watching, listening, etc.